The Last of Us Part 2 is the sequel to the best-selling post-apocalyptic zombie genre PS3 exclusive that went on to be ported to the PS4, and this game once again follows the characters Ellie and Joel from the first game, but this time the protagonist is Ellie rather than Joel. In the sequel, we see Ellie on the hunt of a cult group after a tragic event occurs that affects her and those that she loves. I will not be getting into spoilers in this review, especially because of the fact that there had been so many leaks prior to the release of the game, and I was able to stay away from them, which was extremely difficult, but it was because I wanted to. I'm a firm believer in the idea that a concept can be good or bad, but it's the execution of said concept that truly makes it good or bad, and since there was a huge backlash involving leaked plot points, I stuck to my guns with that. And just, I know it's been out for a little bit, but this is just my preference. I just want to do another, I want to pile a non-spoiler review on top of the other spoiler reviews that have come out over the past few weeks. But anyway, I'm very excited to do this review because this is my first video game review, and I'm very curious as to how this will turn out, because while I am definitely a gamer, I am a video game person. I love video games. I've grown up with video games for so long. Some of my earliest memories are with video games like Fable: The Lost Chapters and Star Wars: Knights of the Old Republic. I'm not a video game person like I am a movie person. I know way more about the art of filmmaking than I do about graphic design for video games and such, and that's not... I love that I sounded a little bit kind of pretentious when I said I don't know anything about graphic design. I didn't mean to sound like that. But obviously I've had more experience with looking into the ideas of filmmaking rather than actual video game creation. But luckily, Naughty Dog, the studio behind this game, has made cinematic-style games for over a decade at this point, so I did perceive some overlap, so this may actually help me going forward. It's giving me the structure of a movie, sort of, but it's also helping me kind of hone how I view games as far as, like, a critical standpoint. But anyway, before I get into my thoughts on this video game... I wanted to say film because that's what I normally say. But anyway, I first want to remind you guys to hit that like button and also to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. And, yep, let's get into the review of Last of Us Part 2. Like the game that came before it, The Last of Us Part 2 has an abundance of fully realized three-dimensional characters. Ellie is given more to do as a playable character, and Ashley Johnson is given the chance to explore a wide spectrum of human emotions and gives one of the most powerful performances I've ever seen in a video game. And Troy Baker returns in the role of Joel, and while his focus is lessened compared to the first game, his contributions to the universe never go unnoticed, and Baker gives a more weathered and fantastic performance as this man who has killed so many people to protect those he loves as well as himself, even if the results aren't necessarily morally upright. They've also added in a few new supporting characters that come along for a ride, and there wasn't a single one that felt underutilized or unneeded. And just a couple of ones off the top of my head. You have Dina, Ellie's love interest, and I would actually do the game a disservice by not mentioning Abby, who is brilliantly played by Laura Bailey. She is someone who has been affected a lot by the backlash from this game, especially recently. I heard, within the past couple of days, she started receiving death threats because of various things, and it's not even about the performance, it's about, like, the character, but again, I don't want to get into the spoilers, but most of you have probably heard it because of how big it was on Twitter. But without getting into any spoilers for her character, she is just like she's just like many of the characters in the storytelling universe. It would be diminutive. I'm really bad with words, especially with those words. It it would be counterproductive to just label these people as inherently good or evil. And for a while, I did begin labeling her, but as the game progresses, I actually found her as empathetic as any other character that I have come to love up to this point. And she's a really good character, despite, in my opinion, despite what a lot of people say about her. And by good, I mean interesting and three-dimensional, not necessarily like on the spectrum of good and evil. I never felt like I disliked or hated any character purely because of how they were written. Rather, I found myself agreeing or disagreeing with their motivations and choices, but understood their reasonings and never felt that any decision branched away from my understanding of character personalities. Video games are overly defined by the idea of giving players as much choice as possible in how they form the story and the characters, and even with more of a story-based game, this can happen, but increasingly we have seen more and more games that do this less, like this game and the one before. Instead of making tiny choices for the characters, we are meant to just accept the characters for who they are meant to be, and we're meant to accept these characters as who they are, the choices that they make, and even if we wouldn't do them ourselves. This helps further cement some of video games' best and most realized characterization ever. The story itself is less of a country-crossing adventure like the first one was. We spend most of our time in a post-apocalyptic Seattle, and because of this, we really get to more of an idea of the scope of the world. All the levels take place in extremely large sections of the city, some being a bit more open world than others, and some not really being, but still feeling like they are. I mean, these levels are f***ing massive, and these are not only used to give us a great idea of scope, but also to visually tell other stories in the universe. Even if you don't spend your time collecting all the various letters found throughout the world, each area feels lived in, and like each individual room is full of things that can hint at life prior to, and even just after the pandemic. This is a level of detail that even the first game did not have, in my opinion, and replaying the first game and then immediately switching over to this game just made the differences even more noticeable. And as for the main story, this is, in my opinion, the best story made for a video game up to this point. And this is not surprising. Naughty Dog has made many games that made the concept of story-based cinematic gaming popular. And while the first game boasted an emotional, complex story that already felt hard to beat, the developers, I thought, rose to the occasion, more than rose to the occasion with this game. The focus in this game is pain, anger, and sadness, and how it can cause even the best of people to commit atrocious acts, especially through very ultra-violent means, and each character plays into this theming in some way, big or small. This is a very difficult game to get through, and not because I wasn't enjoying it, far from it. This one's an easier category for me too, because of my knowledge of cinematography and visual effects in the film industry. So this one was an easy one to just really pull out and kind of convert for video games. But this is possibly the best looking game that Naughty Dog will make solely for this generation. Actually, no, this is their last game for this generation. Yeah, this is definitely going to be one of the top tier best looking games of this generation before we actually make the jump into the next one, right when the PS5 and the Xbox Series X comes out. They build off of the graphical scope of Uncharted 4 and bump it up a few notches, giving us wonderful weather effects, immense forests, and the hauntingly beautiful sights of a post-apocalyptic and war-torn Seattle. And I already touched on the art design and how well detailed the world is. That's as much a credit to the story as it is to the credit of the production and character designers. And not once did during this time did I experience any issues with frame rate drops or pop-ins. And I use a launch version of the PS4, so to me that was far more impressive. And the character models and motion capture on display look the most realistic out of any game that I've seen up to this point. And thank God a studio has finally found a way to make a kiss between two people actually feel realistic. And just I understand that such a thing is difficult to animate in general, not just for a video game, but just in any kind of like animation format. But just seriously, that kiss that we saw in one of the first trailers that was between Ellie and Dina still looks amazing. It feels passionate and believable, and we're getting even closer to, video games looking more and more and more like reality. Playing Part 2 right after the first game, you start to notice the similarities with how the characters move, but then you also notice some big updates. While The Last of Us was arguably a more linear game, with an almost obvious set path in front of you, save for a few areas where you could explore a little bit, and also for me there were a few areas where I got lost, especially in this one hotel that you go through about halfway through the game, where you're just trying to escape from some human enemies, some scavengers. And I legitimately got lost multiple times because there were like different ways to go, but not the way to go forward. That part was a little bit confusing. But all of this is turned up to 11 in Part 2. And I will say, I had way less issue getting lost in this game. There were some bits where it was like a little bit harder, but that was just because I had to really think about what I was doing. But anyway, each area feels and is more open than before. In many of the buildings, while there is usually like one or two possible routes in and out, there are more areas to explore and scavenge for supplies and crafting materials. Hell, are you walking down a road and you see a point where you can traverse to the next area, but there are at least 5 buildings near that look like you can explore in? Go for it. I encourage it wholeheartedly. Sometimes you'll get more of that visual storytelling. Sometimes you'll find a lot of supplies that you needed and potentially will need later. Sometimes you go through a building and find a crafting table, and then you realize that with all the exploring and the scavenging that you've done, you have enough for 4 weapons upgrades. And I'm not talking about like 4 upgrades are open. I'm saying if you pick it right, you can actually craft 4 weapons upgrades right there where you are, because that happened to me multiple times, and it's happening to me right now. I'm even doing there's a New Game Plus version where you can actually take your progress and everything that you've leveled up in the game and go forward, which, yeah, I'm a sucker for that kind of stuff. But anyway, so yeah, you get there, you find that you can craft 4 things, and so you do it, and you feel really good that you found it. And also sometimes you cut through a store only to find that there are more buildings that you can access that were hiding behind that one. And so it's not just those like 5 buildings that you saw, now it's like 7. And that's not even considering the fact that there may be more buildings behind that building. The world encourages exploration in this way, as well as with the puzzles being offered in the majority of areas. One complaint that I had with the first game was in the environmental puzzles. There were some sections where the answers weren't apparent, or you'd have to find a pallet to help someone get across that couldn't swim, and, they needed to traverse to another part where there wasn't as much water, and thank God that particular part is not there, because now Ellie can swim, and it's really nice. Any other environmental puzzles are never that asinine, and instead rely more on contextual challenges that are in no way ever feel dull. like with traversal, combat is very similar to the first game, but they use this game to add so much more variety. You know, on top of the multi-tiered shopping malls and apartments and houses that you have to navigate in order to either outflank or outrun enemies, you can choose to be sneaky, which is what I did most of the time, using cover and even crouching and crawling in tall grass. Two new additions to this game. Or you could just go in guns blazing or outflanking in order to bring hell down on someone with hard-hitting punches and melee weapons. And even those Molotov cocktails, I used way too many of those. I used way too many of those in this game, but Part 2 has some of the most brutal and violent combat animation I've ever seen, with the sound design playing a big factor in it. Hearing flesh be torn by your knife, the sound of bones breaking when you hit someone in the arm or the face with a mallet, and the explosions followed by flesh, bone, and blood raining down on the ground. Even the sounds of dying humans are difficult to listen to and watch. I found myself doing stealth kills the most, just so I didn't have to listen to the blood-curdling screams and blood-filled gurgles of my kills. And even their highly detailed faces got to me. And I'm not even very squeamish when it comes to movies and video games. And I also have to point out this one thing that they did with the game, which was, what is it? Whenever you dispatch someone stealthily, eventually somebody will be like, each character has a name. It's weird, because there were a few moments where, and I wish I could have recorded my reaction the first time that I noticed this, but I had killed like 3 people stealthily, and this was a large area, and one of the people started looking for one of them, and they said their name was like Sarah or something. And it was so weird. And then when they found it, they started hunting for me, and then I started being more out there with everything. And I shot someone in the head with a very loud revolver, and then they shouted their name. They're like, Justin, no. And it was I was like, what the f***? I've never seen that kind of detail in a video game before. Enemy varieties come back in Part 2, and have, of course, been improved. In the previous games, all of the human enemies played the same way. Never really felt any differences. But the game focuses on 2 separate human groups that you have to battle with, the wolves and the Seraphites. The wolves use more militarized tactics and weapons, whereas the Seraphites are far more tribal and mostly communicate tactically through whistling, and primarily use more simple weaponry like just knives and bows and arrows. And I don't know, understanding the differences can lead to staying one step ahead of the much better enemy AI. And the game has even added dogs in that can sniff you out if you don't distract them in some way, or just outright kill them. I know a lot of people couldn't just outright kill a dog even in a video game, but when the dog catches you, they can inflict some major damage and will potentially stop you longer, or at least long enough for their masters to take you out quicker. And I will say I am not proud of it, but after a while, when I started becoming a little bit more brutish in my gameplay, I definitely used a few, please nobody judge me, but because the dogs in the game scared me after a while, I started using Molotov cocktails on them. Burn already! Sorry. Anyway, moving on. So, as for the infected, we still have the normal variations like the runners and the bloaters, but one type that they have added is called a shambler. It's like a bloater, but tougher seeming, and it shoots out noxious gas that can conceal other enemies long enough for them to catch you off guard, cut off escape routes, or even damage your health significantly. And not only that, they do it at random intervals whenever they're near you, and if you're too close to their body when they die, they still explode. So that definitely doesn't help on that sense. And the mob mentality of the infected is handled immensely better and makes them much more of of a force to be reckoned with. I felt this especially for the Stalkers, which were able to mask themselves from your listening mode ability for extended periods of time. All of these factors played into making Part 2 my favorite survival horror experience in years, and I don't even like horror in general, or at least I have an appreciation for it, but I don't like being scared. This game absolutely floored me. The Last of Us was already a great game in and unto itself, and never seemed to beg for or even leave the door open for a sequel. But Naughty Dog found a way to do it, and do it great. Even to the point where they outshined the original in pure quality. Improving on almost every aspect, in almost every way, this sequel, carried by Ellie, feels like what everything that Naughty Dog has learned about making cinematic story-based games has been leading up to. This is a moving, emotional story, topped off by excellent and exhilarating gameplay with top-of-the-line visuals that is probably the best that we're going to get from this generation, especially since, I think that Ghost of Tsushima could top it, but I'm not sure. I'll have to see when it actually comes out in about a week or so. And Cyberpunk is getting delayed until the next generation, so that's definitely not going to count. And with the leaks that came out for this game, a lot of people were not happy with the story beats, and I know that there are people who still don't like the story even in context. But knowing the story beats in context, even the concept I disagree with in some ways. Like, I know I wouldn't like it if I knew it beforehand, but the execution was masterful in my opinion. This is... I highly recommend this to all of you guys simply because of that. This is truly one of the best video games ever made, and with that, my review ends here. Thank you guys so much for watching my video and listening to my thoughts on this particular game. I sincerely appreciate it. Once again, don't forget to hit that like button and also to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. And as always, farewell until the next video, all of you casual fans and more hardcore fans alike. Normally I say casual moviegoers and movie fans alike. I don't know what to do with this part, so I just threw that out there. But anyway, farewell to all of you guys, and keep on being awesome, my friends.